On Jerry's 13th birthday, a parcel arrived at their new house in Shoreditch. Dr. Bear, care of Jerry Billing Esquire. It contained a sort of tube device. "A supersonic sonic screwdriver for a super bear," said a note inside. No one knew quite what it meant, but Jerry loved it anyway. A few years later, another parcel arrived, addressed in just the same way. This time it held a very, very long scarf and a floppy hat, exactly the right size for the teddy. Encouraged by Mr. Chesterton, Jerry stayed at school to sit A-levels, and then went on to university. He gained his degree and, having never been able to choose between history and science, combined them to become an archaeologist. A brown paper parcel arrived at his archaeological dig in Mexico one day, addressed now to Dr. Bear, care of Dr. Jerry Billing. That title showed the doctor had indeed been keeping an eye on Jerry, just as he'd said he would. This time the package contained a bear-sized cricketing jumper and, for reasons that none of them ever found out, a bear-sized stick of celery. But that had nothing on their bewilderment a few years later, just before Jerry's wedding day, when he received a parcel full of the most garish, ridiculous clothing ever seen. Jerry said even Dr. Bear would be embarrassed to be seen out in it, but there was also a little brooch in the shape of a cat in the parcel, and Jerry wore it on his wedding suit in place of a buttonhole. Claire was a grandma now. Anne was married to a lovely young man who worked in a bank and had 3 children, Peter, Paul and Tony. Jerry and his wife, Wendy, had Susan first, then Vicky. Frankie didn't have children. He lived with a wonderful man called Derry, which had bothered Ray for a while until Claire talked to him about living happily ever after and how they must try not to impede the happiness flowing through other people's lives. Then he understood and was okay with it. He still occasionally said the wrong thing, but his children understood that he was doing his best. On the day of Vicky's christening, Dr. Bear joined them, carried by Susan, wearing a most remarkable jumper decorated with question marks. The years passed, but the parcels never stopped. A velvet coat arrived just before Jerry's 40th birthday. A leather jacket came on the day he was receiving an award for his pioneering work on the Aztec civilization. At Jerry's 50th birthday party, Dr. Bear came along in a smart suit, with tiny baseball boots on his feet. Peter's daughter Daisy, Claire was a great-grandmother now, proudly carried him around, although he had to be scrubbed later where she tried to feed him some birthday cake. Sometimes there was a report in the newspapers or on the internet or in TV news, and any family members who were in the room at the same time would turn to each other and say, "I bet that's got something to do with the doctor." When the next parcel came along, with a tweed coat and fez hat, Claire was alone. She'd lost Ray the year before, and most of her happiness had gone with him. They'd grown even closer as the decades went by, and she'd loved him to the end. But the love she felt for her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren made her do everything she could to keep the happiness flowing through their lives. Claire was confined to bed now. Jerry, always the most observant of her children, as well as the most empathic, had realized that although she'd agreed to go into a nursing home, it wasn't what she really wanted. As she had done on all those shopping trips so long ago, he worked out what she would prefer and arranged that instead. She had wonderfully kind carers to look after her in her Shoreditch home, and her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren were in and out all the time. Even Ian Chesterton popped in occasionally. He was in his 90s now too, although he was still wonderfully active and told her so many tales of his life with the doctor that she almost felt she'd been there with them. It was only then that she really began to understand how it had been for Jerry all those decades before. Claire didn't have long, she knew that, but she held on. Dr. Bear lived in her room now, keeping an eye on her, Jerry said, although from what she knew of the doctor, she thought he usually needed someone keeping an eye on him. It was comforting, though, knowing that something that was so close to Jerry Almost part of him was close to her too. And then, one day, not long after Ian had popped round to tell her in utter astonishment that he'd been told the doctor was a woman now, Claire's great-great-grandson Stephen rushed in with a paper parcel under his arm. Grandma Claire, it came! Dr. Bear's new present came! Grandpa Jerry said to bring it straight away to show you. Stephen pulled back the wrapping, and there was a bright orange top and a stylish tweed overcoat. Oh, Dr. Bear will look so smart in these, Claire told him. He picked up the bear from the end of her bed, stripped off its rainbow t-shirt and braces, and dressed it in the new clothes. Claire was right. Dr. Bear did look very, very smart in them. Gotta go, said Stephen. Got a piano lesson. Enjoy it, darling, said his great-great-grandmother. Maybe you can come and play me some of your pieces later. He said, sounding exactly like Jerry had when he was a little boy, and ran off. Claire couldn't take her eyes off Dr. Bear, sitting once more at the end of her bed. The doctor had watched over Jerry from when he was a boy all the way through to today, with that boy now a wonderful father and grandfather of almost 67 years. The day when Jerry had been lost in London had been the worst day of her life, or her life as it had been that far, yet it had brought them all so much happiness in the end. Happy ever after? Not quite, not for her, but for poor humans stuck in this one place, living through one time, it hadn't been so bad. She'd had a lot, oh so much happiness along the way. Thank you, Dr. Bear, she whispered, and closed her eyes for the last time. Thank you, Dr. Bear, I say, and thank you, Doctor, for everything.